We're going to be having a panel discussion to explore how we can unleash the potential of young Australians. Fantastic topic, especially being a father and a partner at PwC. I have 2 daughters, and one of the concerns that I always have on my mind is what does the future hold for them? And I think that the future is fantastic because there is a lot of opportunity out there. I'd like to thank our industry partners for sharing our enthusiasm in this event, the Ducere Business School and the Foundation for Young Australians. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome and respectful welcome to former Prime Minister, the Honourable Gillard, who will be moderating the discussion panel this afternoon. So on behalf of everyone today, thank you for joining us and for continuing to invest your time, energy and intellect into furthering this wonderful country of ours. We immensely value your contribution. So here at PwC, when we think about enabling young people to innovate, we see a strong correlation with the need to encourage additional focus on STEM. Engineering, mathematics, science and technology are really important, and our firm is a strong advocate for encouraging fresh thinking about how to engage people in this topic. We believe it is a critical component of ensuring young Australians are made job ready for future workforce that will look very, very different to today. A copy of our firm's thought leadership on research in STEM to the side here, so please feel free to take a copy. If there aren't any left, we'll get one to you post the event. Finally, thank you once again for coming here today. We have a great presentation from across the community with NFPs, big and small business, startup, entrepreneurs, banks, educators and students. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jack Highlands, who is the CEO of Ducere Business School, who will formally introduce the panel members.
Thank you very much, John. I'd just like to extend that welcome to all of you today as well, seeing a lot of familiar faces, but also a lot of new faces out there, and that's fantastic for all of you to have given up your time on a Wednesday afternoon to come and engage on what we hope is going to be a fantastic discussion and also a great event afterwards. So, as I say, welcome to everyone, and we're very excited about today's panel discussion on innovation and how we can enable young Australians to innovate more effectively. We've had a full day here at PwC, and we're extremely grateful to our industry partner PwC for providing the facility to us today, with all of our students who are taking part in either our MBA in Innovation and Leadership, which we deliver in partnership with the University of Canberra, but also some of our bachelor students that have joined us as well, who've been engaging in a number of different topics. That began today with a presentation from the Foundation for Young Australians, and it sort of spoke to the poignancy of today's topic, which not only is interesting but also rather self-serving, as we need to figure out how young Australians are going to pay for everyone else's retirement in the years to come, as those numbers start tipping in the wrong direction. As I say, this is part of our Innovation and Leadership MBA series, and we hold these events every 2 months as we strive to provide an online MBA which provides the flexibility of online delivery that many of our modern students are after, but also doesn't lose many of the benefits of face-to-face engagement with industry, with peers, and with wider networks. And so we hold these events every 2 months, again hosted by our industry partners, which include PwC, also Save the Children, the Federal Treasury, Telstra, and a number of other great organisations that are supporting us. So moving on quickly to introduce our panel and then get through to the meat of this afternoon's discussions. So our chair, as we know, requires no introduction, as the 27th Prime Minister of Australia and the Chancellor of Ducere Global Business School. We thank Julia Gillard for joining us again today, and her time and dedication to these topics and the education of Australians, but also others around the world, continues to be inspirational to all of us at Ducere, and it's much appreciated. Moving on, also, we then have Rufus Black joining us here, who's also one of the leading figures in Australian education, as the Master of Ormond College and also the Deputy Chancellor of Victoria University, and a Director of Teach for All, again with a massive influence in the educational sector here and overseas, and key to providing the frameworks moving forward for the educational services required to get that innovation agenda moving that we're all after. Ransom as well joining us, and we're very lucky on this particular topic that Holly's been able to give up her time, a leading voice now for us on the intergenerational engagement which is required between business and students as they're coming through, and as CEO of Emergent Solutions, focused on working with some of Australia's key figures and organisations on creating high-performance intergenerational cultures. And as among many of her achievements, Holly has recently been appointed as non-executive director of Port Adelaide Football Club.
But any fellow Port fans in the audience? Is there any chance? Yes! Oh. Awesome. Love that.
True.
And any Carlton fans, I think, playing on Sunday. So. But also done a huge number of things, including being the chair of the G20 Youth Summit. Jan Owen, who we're delighted to welcome back to our panel, who spoke for us previously at an event earlier this year, or the end of last year, I believe. So Jan Owen, as a leader of the Australian youth sector and CEO of the Foundation for Young Australians, Jan received the Order of Australia for her services to children and young people. And prior to her role at FYA, Jan was also the Executive Director of Social Ventures Australia, that's been a pioneer in the social entrepreneurship space. And then coming back full circle to John, thank you very much again for hosting us. John Riccio, who's a PwC partner and digital services lead. John has over 20 years' experience in the digital and technology space, working with some of the leading organisations across Australia, Europe, APAC and the United States, and so also we're very fortunate to get that perspective in today's discussion. So I will now hand over to our Chancellor, Julia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jack, for that introduction. It's been historically said that you know you're getting older when police officers and doctors start looking young to you. I've got a different measure. You know you're getting older when CEOs start looking young to you. And at Ducere we have a very young but inspirational CEO. So Jack, thank you for that introduction. I'm here to moderate a panel discussion. I'm not an expert in moderating. I've normally been the one taking the questions, but I will do my best. And we want to explore this question of innovation and young people and what we can do as businesses and a broader community to enable young Australians to innovate. So I want to start by asking our panel members, what are we getting right now in that equation? Always good to start with an upbeat theme. I mean, clearly the issue of innovation, entrepreneurship is everywhere. Universities, vocational education and training is responding by having more courses in innovation and entrepreneurship. Ducere itself has such courses. You can turn on your TV and when you're over the endless Master Chef or other food shows, you can tune in to Shark Tank and watch innovation and entrepreneurship under discussion on mainstream TV. The anecdotal evidence would tell us that young people are more interested in innovation and entrepreneurship and creating their own businesses. So we must be getting some things right. What are they? Jan, what do you think?
Thank you very much and thanks for having me back. I feel like I'm on faculty here somehow, but I'm not being paid, so that's an issue. Do I need to turn this on? Is it on?
I think someone does it for you,
great.
Yes.
Oh, great, excellent. So the three things I think very quickly that we're doing right. One of the reports that FYA put out 12 months ago called the New Work Order actually showed that we have some of the lowest barriers to entry in Australia. We are by and large, we're not a corrupt country. It is easy to do business here. It's kind of above the board.
I think you could put a slightly more positive spin on that, but I think we know where you're going, yes.
Overwhelmingly, we are not a corrupt country. So the conditions for actually starting up and getting onto the playing field are actually very good in Australia. The other thing is, to your anecdotal point, Julia, in fact, the largest growing cohort of young entrepreneurs and innovators, there's two cohorts in Australia, one under 30 and the other is over 55. So actually young people and their parents are going to join forces in a minute and start setting up businesses, which will be very interesting. And Holly will have a lot to say about that. And the third thing I think is that we've got ecosystems now. And only 5 years ago, there were no ecosystems in Australia around entrepreneurship. In the space that we're in at FYA, we're very interested in social innovation. So we back young people who are doing change for social impact and social good. Only a few years ago, there were no impact investors. There were very few entrepreneurs. It was not named and articulated as a sector. So in both business entrepreneurship and in social entrepreneurship, we're now seeing ecosystems investors, intermediaries, accelerators, programs that support and turbocharge entrepreneurs. They're 3 really good starting points for Australia, which is where we're at now.
That's fantastic, and I can feel a sitcom coming on, which would be parents and young people innovating and involved in a venture together. Someone's got to write that script. That's an idea for someone in the audience. An entrepreneur. Holly, what do you think we're doing right?
Look, I think to touch on that ecosystem point that Jan made, I think there's a lot to be said in the growth that we've seen over the last 5 years. And it's amazing to me even that 12 months ago we weren't even talking about innovation and entrepreneurship. I mean, it's extraordinary to think now that we're deeming those to be overused buzzwords, and yet you were struggling to be able to hear them in the Australian vernacular and see examples of it 12 months ago. So I think the momentum...
Spell them.
Yeah, well, that's true. Entrepreneurship, that's probably fair. So I think the momentum that we've got around the conversation is fantastic. The other thing I would say is there's great examples. So what we've seen, I think, in the last 5 years is an extraordinary number of Australians successfully start businesses. We've seen the age that people are prepared to take that jump drop dramatically in terms of seeing a lot of examples of entrepreneurs at 18, at 22, at 25, popping up all over the place, and I think increasingly proving to young people that that is a viable career path, that that's something that they can be thinking about pursuing, and that's a dramatic shift. You know, when we think about even the awareness of a non-traditional career and the ability to be your own economic agent and run your own enterprise now being the sort of option people can take. I think the other thing we're seeing is some great examples of I wouldn't describe it as sector-wide leadership yet. I think that's probably part of what we can talk about, how we grow the ecosystem and concentrate it further. But we've got great examples of individuals who are pioneering in all sorts of different spaces. Jan's work in FYA is an example. The work being done with Coding Club around the country to get young people coding and in STEM is another. So these great examples of people who are in their own way stepping up and saying, I understand the importance of this and I'm going to play a really active role in how we try and catalyse this for Australia.
Thank you. Rufus.
We continue to be a kind of nation of extraordinary ideas generators. We generate twice the number per capita of patents compared to the United States, which we normally think of as kind of leader in this space. So we are a potent nation for generating ideas, and we've really set our system up in the way we fund and support research, despite criticisms that get made of it, that generate a huge number of ideas. Translation's a second challenge, but as you know, we've already heard, we're starting to make some very real progress there. The other thing that I think is working well is that business is sending signals that they're going to value entrepreneurial skills, and that's lowering the risk to anybody wanting to actually embrace acquiring those skills. So they're sending powerful signals in what they're looking for inside traditional organisations, and that's making it a much easier thing to do. And we've also had, and I think it's important, the media has helped shift the ecosystem. It would have been easy to recall the white shoe brigades of a previous era and where entrepreneurship didn't have a great name in Australia. And we've had the media actually prepared to tell a different kind of story, and also to some degree to help amplify, pick up on anything that's painting our future and why it's needed, and allow that actually story to be told in a pretty uncynical way. And in a country which has sometimes struggled to have an uncynical conversation about the future, this has been one of those conversations. So the context is right.
John.
The only other comment I'd make is corporate Australia is starting to actually acknowledge that innovation is part of today's world and the world that we live in today. And innovation is nothing new, from the invention of the telephone to the production line to electricity. The difference today is people didn't see technology innovation and technology disruption as something that would threaten corporate Australia. But we are now at a point where corporate Australia is accepting that that is the case, and therefore embracing the whole startup community and the innovation agenda to actually use it to help them transform themselves and reinvent themselves, rather than trying to protect from disruption. So I think that's a big shift, and obviously support from government is also helping in terms of investors and communities and ecosystems.
So can we now move to canvassing what more we need to do? So what aren't we getting right at the moment? I have just been on a trip to Silicon Valley, and I'm very conscious that a lot of this dialogue in Australia always comes down to why can't we be more like Silicon Valley, is sort of wishing away questions of scale, and you can't wish away those questions of scale. Though I was taken by the fact that in Silicon Valley, the most common topic of conversation was how disruptive was Juno, the new car hire system, going to be to Uber, and its particular innovation actually isn't anything to do with passengers. Its particular innovation is that it is offering drivers an equity stake in the business, and so the potential of disrupting Uber is that it takes the drivers and therefore the passengers have to follow. So, you know, something that we're still digesting in a regulatory sense, Uber already being disrupted by a new competitor. So there is a lot to learn from that kind of marketplace agility, but we can't just mimic it here because we don't have the same size, scale and concentration. But what can we learn, and what should we be doing to better enable young people in particular to be innovators and entrepreneurs? I might come the other way through. So yes, John, you first.
I guess the first thing is accept that that is going to be the case. Business models don't last 20 to 30 years anymore, they last 3 to 5. Companies that will disrupt you probably don't exist today. So accepting that the world has changed, accepting that the world will continue to change, and that innovation and startups and those new ecosystems are part of your world today, and therefore if we embrace them, support them and invest in them, then we can't ask for much more than that.
Jan, I think you made the comment before about there are relatively low barriers to entry in our overwhelmingly clean system. I'm sure that's what you said. Do we have the cultural mindset, the sort of Silicon Valley cultural mindset, to go alongside that as much as we should? A toleration for experimentation and potential failure. Is that one thing we're lacking, or do you see a series of others?
Well, of course, I would talk about education as absolutely key. So, again, you know, our research says that we're below proficiency in terms of, you know, when measured against other countries around some of the skills that are almost the prerequisites to be entrepreneurial. So the ability to problem solve and the ability to think creatively and innovatively, the ability to communicate, what we call this sort of set of enterprising skills, which are now, by the way, being privileged by employers. So we did the largest open data scrape of job ads in the last 3 years ever in Australia. And we reported last week on this 4.2 million job ads we analysed. And in 3 years, employers had increased their interest in young people with digital skills by 200%. For critical thinking and problem solving by 158%, for creativity and innovation by 58%, and communication and presentation by 25%. So in 3 years, employers in this country are asking for a very, very different employee in the under 5-year entry. So that immediately takes us back to what happens between school and getting to that place of going into employment. So we have an opportunity in Australia which is profound, and partly it is actually to your point and the work actually, Julie, that you did about an education revolution, where we said let's dial up and change the landscape of education. And one of those was, how do we create the young person of the future while still at school and not getting locked into a system that actually will not serve them? So the new basics, the new foundational skills are around innovation, entrepreneurial mindset. You don't have to be an entrepreneur, but that mindset is critically important. And our $20 Boss program that we run at FYA is, you know, showcases 15-year-olds just doing remarkable things, you know, with $20 in 1 month. I'm looking at my team leader who runs it here. You know, my favourite story is the 3 boys from Alice Springs High, Centralian High, who actually, with $20, cast their eye around the school and said, our teachers are looking a little bit chubby, let's run a boot camp. And in a month got a boot camp up where they kind of bribed the teachers into attending, because how can you not support your students? And run now a fitness boot camp, which they took out of school at the age of 15. That is the future of young people's learning. It's do it in school, take it out of school, still go to school and reinforce those skills. That's new education to me. It's immersive, it's hands-on, it's doing it, it's failing fast in a safe environment where failure is tolerated, supported, celebrated, and where you learn these skills. And also you learn what you're good at, because not everyone's an entrepreneur, but gee, that kid at the school who said, listen, you all need a website and I can build a website, made a lot of money in his class last year in $20 Boss. So, you know, we're seeing these great opportunities and great examples. They're not embedded. These skills are not in the DNA of 15-year-olds in this country, but we absolutely have an opportunity in the next 6 years. If we started at 12 and ended at 18, we would get a different generation of young people coming out of school by implementing some of these things. It's not hard.
Thank you. I'm moderately worried about the report cards of the children that went up to their teachers and said, you know what, you could lose a few kilos, but we might have to investigate that in $20 Boss too to see how they went. Rufus, I'll go to you. Education, are we getting it right? What more do we need to do?
I very much leave to Jan the conversation about schools, but I completely agree. Our school system is, we've got to be honest, it's not fit for purpose. The kind of actual curriculum, particularly in secondary schools, is not producing students who have the set of skills needed for the future that's fast arriving. The way we're doing it isn't appropriate. A complete revamp of our curricula and the way in which we deliver it is urgently needed and has been for some time. If that's true of schools, it's dramatically true of higher education. Higher education in Australia is totally unfit for the purpose of creating tomorrow's workers, because it isn't creating people who are going to create their own jobs. You will struggle to find in a single campus in the country a course dedicated to problem solving. You'll find the odd little subject on entrepreneurship dotted around, but every student in universities should have as an integral part of their education the ability to be able to create their own work, to create their own enterprise in some kind of form. Because everything that Jan and others are telling us is that's exactly what they're going to have to do in the course of their lifetime. So the universities are not gearing up for that. They're not valuing. If we struggle to get skills to do with emotional intelligence and social intelligence taught at schools, we devote virtually zero time to them in universities. We assume if you put students together in a team that somehow they'll learn all those skills. Actually, you've got to seriously resource that as a project in itself and value it as much as you'd value anything else. And then you've got to change the mindset of those who are creating these ideas. I said at the start we created twice the number of ideas per capita as the United States. We actually produce out of those ideas half the number of businesses. We sit at the second last in the OECD in terms of university engagement with industry. That is a pervasive sense that universities are in a world of their own, that they are not integrally engaged with the challenges and questions that industry are asking. If we want a Silicon Valley, and I don't think we should want a Silicon Valley, I think we should want a Melbourne or a Sydney or whatever it is, because our ecosystems need to be distinct and different and build on our capabilities and our challenge, which is very, very different. But we're actually going to need to see a complete change in the way of what higher education values, what people get promoted for, and what gets taught. The university in a decade's time needs to look totally different to the university of today. And right now, the failure of government to front up to real higher education reform is a serious barrier to that future.
I'm going to pick up on a bit of that and then go to Holly. I'm not going to pick up on the bit at the end, which everybody might be expecting me to pick up in the current context. But interestingly, on this problem-solving skills, apart from being Chancellor at Ducere, I spend a lot of my time now chairing the Global Partnership for Education, which is the major organisation seeking to support education in developing countries. We're trying to solve challenges like 121 million children of primary and lower secondary age won't go to school for a day. So challenges like that. But whilst doing that, we're working with developing countries on improving the quality of their systems. And some of them are looking to leapfrog the debate about literacy and numeracy testing to actually have a quality diagnostic which is about problem solving, which if you get it right, the assessment of problem solving actually has embedded in it literacy and numeracy skills. So they're sort of onto the dilemma. And if, in very low capacity contexts, any of those developing countries can actually get that right, it will zoom them, instead of going through the kind of education development we went through slowly and painfully, they'll actually zoom around the outside and be in front of us. So that's an interesting competitive challenge for our nation to think about. And of course, what Ducere is centrally trying to do is broker this distance between universities and industry. So we're very familiar with that challenge. But it all comes back, I think, to this word you used, Holly, of the ecosystem. Who do we need in this ecosystem? As they work together, who do we need to strengthen? I think out of this discussion, we've certainly said there are aspects about school education that need to be strengthened. There are aspects about higher education. There are aspects about industry, university links. What else needs to be working in this ecosystem that you see isn't working now?
Just reflecting, listening to everyone up here talking, I feel so grateful that we have all of these individuals as leaders in this conversation. It gives me so much hope that we're really going to actually be able to drive progress. Just hearing all of you talk and knowing the extent of your background and involvement in this space, I just feel very grateful as a young person that you're playing the role that you are in the ecosystem. To address your question, I think you touched on such an important point there, because for me, we have an incentives challenge. Part of the difficulty is that the way our system is structured right now, there's misaligned incentives. Like, if you look at it from a school context, I'm really fortunate to have the privilege of working across the schooling sector in Australia. And we'll talk all the time about the enterprising skill set, how important it is. I come from a generation where everyone was a school captain. Everyone got a medal for running in a race. We didn't incrementally build resilience into a generation. And that's a fundamental challenge when it comes to non-traditional careers, casualised workforce and entrepreneurship. Because you have to get really comfortable quite fast with the fact that things aren't necessarily going to be operating in a linear manner. There's going to be a road to success scattered with failure, and that needs to be the norm. But when you talk to principals, they say, yeah, look, that's great, but the VCE requirements, the HSC requirements, look at what we're scorecarded on. Look at ultimately what it is we're benchmarked against. We can try and squeeze it into the extracurricular hours, or we can try and find, 10% of the curriculum we can tweak with, but fundamentally the structure doesn't support moving towards an entrepreneurial system. I was laughing, Rufus, a little bit when you were talking about university, because I had an entrepreneurship professor at university that had never run a business. And that's not that uncommon. Admittedly, I honestly think that has improved in the last 5 years. But again, we've got this challenge. People got promoted to senior positions in universities because they were phenomenal at publishing high standard journal articles, not necessarily because they had the requisite industry experience or the commercial mindset to be able to really empower students and build the learning environment that was going to support them being able to head out into enterprise. So I think one of the challenges that we've got to address is we can continue to advance these ideas. And as I've said, we're a great ideas nation. I think one of the challenges we've got is we've got to have some bold courage, either from individual players or some sector-wide efforts to go, how do we redesign the incentive structures of the system in order to support the outcome we actually know we need to achieve? Because right now, I think there's a gap in between those two.
And can I just push you a bit on that?
Sure.
Which sectors would you put top of the list that you would want to see this emerging leadership for the whole sector and a drive for change?
Again, my big passion sits in education.
Yep.
So for me, that's happening at a secondary schooling. I mean, ideally in primary school. Actually, I think we know the power of the education value, particularly at an under 12 stage, and how pivotal that is. And I think I've got an example actually of $20 Boss being run. My friend's a deputy principal of a school that did it with a year 6 class this week and turned $20 into $375 with a similar fitness regime. So I think it's incredible that we're giving these opportunities to young people to do those sorts of things. I think we definitely need to see that sort of leadership at those sorts of levels. And I think that misaligned incentives in part still this challenge around information lag too and information asymmetry. I was staying at a mentor's house recently who's got a daughter doing HSC this year, and I was looking at that big fat career book, that you get that lists everything under the sun you could humanly dream of being. And I'm thumbing through it, reading it, the career options that she's looking at. I'm going, so much of this book is going to be automated. How is it that we're still putting this in front of young people? How is it that I'm still meeting 15 and 16-year-olds every week who think the career path is to go into an accounting type career, because we know when all the research we're seeing is they're exactly the sorts of industries that are going to be reshaped and redesigned. Now, that's not to say that's not a great foundational skill, but what we need to be alive to is communicating to people what it is that, that is a transferable skill. It's not a career pathway necessarily in the way that it used to be in and of itself. So I think we've really got the challenge around misinformation and misaligned incentives that we need to address, and I think we need strong leadership in higher education and in our schooling system that could be government or industry-led.
Can I put a challenge to the panel now around the gender dynamics here and also the advantage-disadvantage dynamics here? A wonderful Silicon Valley saying I ran up against when I was there recently was, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And I think that there's an insight in that. If you are at the top of the top, and obviously when you're in an environment like Silicon Valley, you were talking about people of extraordinary wealth capacity and options, they already live a future which is in advance of what even high capacity people in Australia are living today. So the future's already here, but not everybody's getting the same access. What's the risk that in trying to develop these new education models, this new ecosystem, or adding to the ecosystem that's there, we're further advantaging people who already have a set of great advantages? They go to good schools, the schools that are most likely to adapt first. They've got their pick of universities, the universities most likely to adapt first. They've got a network through their family and social structures that gives them access to mentoring, potentially to capital, and they've got an appetite for risk which comes with being from a secure foundation. One of the conversations of my lifetime I'll always remember is my father tried to argue me. He didn't argue much, but he tried to argue me, post me getting my law degree, into going into public sector employment with my law degree. He came from a very poor background. He'd made a life out of being employed in the public sector. He was a psychiatric nurse. It had offered him the benefits of good superannuation, a retirement that he would never have dreamed of being able to afford. And for him, this was life. This was the safe bet. Get yourself a job in the DPP or Crown prosecutors or something like that. You'll be right for a lifetime. Zero appetite for risk, because he knew from his family background what it can really look like if it goes wrong. Levels of poverty which mean kids leave school at 14. Now, we're not, because of the nation in which we live, going to see people forced back to that. But what is this sort of question around socioeconomic status and appetites for risk? So how do we include everybody in this change that we know is coming and will reshape the workforce and will require more risk-taking and more entrepreneurship? Jan, what do you think?
I won't talk about gender because I'll let Holly talk about that. I'll talk about the kind of what we would normally think about in terms of marginalised groups. And I want to talk about this in relation to the way that you talked about what the OECD is looking to do to frog leap over some of these kind of what were basic skills and include them in other contexts. So, I think about this very, very, very differently, and we do at FYA. I heard an incredible story last week about an Indigenous community in Northern Australia who somebody had, in or not in a right mind, dropped a 3D printer into that community just as they were passing through. And that community had decided in the last few years that it was going to become water bottle free. It was a very, very environmentally thoughtful community. And the elders actually started working out how to use the 3D printer. And within a few days and weeks, they were actually training up the young people and the children in how to use the 3D printer and creating other vessels other than water bottles to use to drink the water. And then the young people were let loose. And the children, the 10 to 11-year-olds, started noticing that things needed fixing. So the wheelchairs, of which many people in the community were in wheelchairs, the joysticks were broken. And so suddenly the 12 and 10-year-olds were 3D printing joysticks and fixing up wheelchairs that for years had not been used properly. The other children started just doing different things in schools, and suddenly this community has become, by the way, the young people, their enterprise out of this community was actually covers for mobile phones, which they're very proud of and will be a business. So, you know, I think about this very differently. I think about what does it look like to give the people that you think are the most unlikely the leg up into a niche market. What does it look like if you actually frog leap this sort of linear pathway, or the ladder, which is supposedly meant to be the pathway, which does not exist anymore, people. Let's be very real. The ladder has been taken away. So what does it look like when you actually give people skills where they're applying them immediately in their own context to serve? And I'm on about value. I want to see technology used to add value and to add value to communities and people's lives. That's why I'm on about social innovation. I'm on about things that create value, not things that just make people rich. So this idea that actually you can create and give people opportunities in niche markets that they would not have had before with tools and skills is actually very, very real. And what about the future now? Yes, the future is now, and some of those things are happening in our country. I had not heard about these things, but I'm now hearing about examples. I want to see that much more systematised, not in a bureaucratic way, but in a way where you share and see what people are doing. Because what's missing in Australia, in a vast country, is we don't know actually always what's going on. It's ridiculous because we're only 23 million people, #3 people. You know, it's crazy that we can't actually understand and see and learn from each other. So I'm very interested in what equality means and what equity of access means, and how you frog leap some of these things and get people the tools and the skills and let them have a go. And entrepreneurship is actually a genius way to do that, but not in a way that's self-serving, in a way that serves community. We're very interested in that, and we're working with young Indigenous people around Australia to do that.
Interesting. Holly, on gender? Not that it should necessarily fall to you to do the gender bit, but maybe Rufus can do it too.
No, I'm happy to pick up on the gender thing.
Okay.
And actually on this disadvantage piece, because I share Jan's view that actually there's a different story here. The gender piece, I think, is a real issue. You know, we created the Wade Institute for Entrepreneurship at the University of Melbourne to deliver the university's first Master of Entrepreneurship degree, and one of our concerns was to make sure we didn't replicate what is seen across many parts of the entrepreneurship community, which is a very serious gender divide. Now, as a result of being kind of attentive to that issue, in our first cohort we got 60% women. It's a fixable problem, but it requires some serious intentionality about not drawing on all the stereotypes, not putting the role models up as men, making sure that the way you've approached it is actually accessible to, you know, across all of the kinds of issues that could become barriers. Just some thoughtfulness has changed that, but that's not true across the board, and we need to attend to it. The issue about social equity, I think, is a really critical one, because what we actually know about entrepreneurs is that they tend not to come from advantaged backgrounds, because actually the risk of being an entrepreneur from an advantaged background is much higher. If you've never had any money, if you've never had any advantage, actually taking some risk is a much lower risk thing to do than if the otherwise clear and comfortable career that lies ahead, you choose to set that to one side. So when you look at entrepreneurship courses, or the people who are doing it, the people who are leading it, disproportionately represented in that are people from one form of community that doesn't belong to those traditions. There's lots of ways of describing that. Socioeconomic terms, immigrant terms, rural versus city, all of those groups are disproportionately positively represented. The key thing, though, is to make sure that they can access the skills to be successful. And that's where we've got to really, I think, focus in Australia on this. The place in which teaching entrepreneur needs to begin are in our least advantaged schools, because that's actually what's going to make the greatest difference. In universities, we've got to have scholarships that are available. At the moment, you'll love this. This is kind of why we need a little bit of reform. It's election time. It's worth mentioning.
I hadn't noticed.
Just in case anyone wants to tweet it, we sought for our Master of Entrepreneurship degree to get governments you can get funding for students for their living costs. And we got this wonderful letter back which said, because this entrepreneurship degree doesn't lead to a job, you're not qualified for providing funding support. So if this had led to a traditional job that will be automated or put out, you could have got funding for it. Because you were going to create the jobs of the future, you were going to take more risk than anybody doing any of that. Our current education policy means we're not eligible. Our master's students aren't eligible for that kind of living cost funding. There's a policy that we could change in the next little while. But that's the thing that's got to change. We've got to create access for all of those people who can most take advantage of it. And that's what will help address this kind of really problematic growing inequality that we've got coming in Australia.
Can I just, before going to Holly and then John, can I just push you on that a little bit? I think access to skills, absolutely right. What about networks,
yes,
though?
No, I think you're right to push on that. Yep. Access to skills should be done in a way that creates access to networks. I think if you're skilling people to do entrepreneurship, a core part of that is to actually introduce them to the ecosystem. Yep. Merely to give skills is not enough. Any skilling opportunity has to come with plugging people into the ecosystem. The wonderful thing about the ecosystem, here and in other places, but it's very noticeable here already, is the generosity of the people in it.
Yeah, right.
Because so many of us who've been involved in it, or entrepreneurs who've succeeded, have only succeeded because other people have been generous with time, with advice, with access, and that generosity is there. So it is, but you're absolutely right, so important to connect them to those networks.
Yeah, definitely. Holly, the gender dynamic?
I might pick up on the inequality piece as well first,
Sure.
and then I'll address the gender side of things. I think one of the things that I find really interesting in this conversation, I'm really optimistic around the role that technology will play in helping us bridge this gap too. And I think to that end, we see some incredible examples of that. You look at mobile phone penetration in India and parts of the developing world, and organisations like the Cherie Blair Foundation, who are doing amazing work getting these business basics disseminated through mobile phones to women right across India and improving their proficiency in business and their success rates with microfinancing loans and things like that. Incredible example, and I think it's why I find it odd that oftentimes in these innovation conversations, we're not talking about digital infrastructure and the accessibility and the inclusive nature in which we design and create that as part of our ecosystem and actually build our ecosystems around that. Because the ability to access the incredible hub of learning that provides for anyone, irrespective of socioeconomic background, should they have the ability to be able to tap into that, is extraordinary. And I think we'll see huge advances and disruption in that space that will help us increasingly lift the population. I think Khan Academy and the like are doing a really great job and are the early iterations of what that space will look like. On the gender side, something I'm really passionate about, I'm fortunate to co-chair the United Nations Global Coalition on Young Women Entrepreneurs and be picking up this piece around young women's economic participation and enterprising skill set. And one of the reasons I'm really passionate about this is because of where we know the world's going. And Julia, to your point earlier, the inequity with which we're starting to, the early signs present that it's likely to play out if we don't make some moves to change it. By that I mean Jan's report calls out the fact, and PwC's as well actually, that 75% of the jobs that will be created in the disruption will be STEM dependent. Now, when we then cast our eyes against, well, what do we know about STEM proficiency rates at the moment and the degree to which we've got women studying it, the best data we've got is talking about 6.7% of women in Australia studying advanced level maths. 1 in 4 of our IT graduates being women, under 1 in 10 engineering graduates being female. And so one of the big challenges we've got is how do we ensure that we've got women studying STEM in schools, doing the best of our ability to get them through the pipeline, but also how do we create and design the accessible short course opportunities, the upskilling once in career, so that women already in industry or early in their early stage 20s who may not have understood the importance of that skill set or had the opportunity to study it can get the ability to upskill their proficiency in it and help prepare themselves where jobs are going. Because my worry is, if we don't move with a great degree of impetus on that, we risk the numbers of women in leadership, women in business actually worsening in the next couple of decades rather than improving. I think we've got to be really alive to the fact that we talk about gender inequity being solved generationally. I don't think we can rest on the laurel of that. I've got a lot of mentors who talk to me about growing up in the age where equal pay got delivered and it was meant to be their generation where it happened. And so I think that notion of just expecting the baton change is going to secure the future that we want, unfortunately, we need to do a lot more actively, I think, to ensure that's going to be the case.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Amen to that. John, on this question of the unequally distributed future.
So I actually agree with Rufus's point. I think we actually have to look below the communities and look at the individuals. If we look at most of the entrepreneurs that have been successful, they've got certain attributes around passion, commitment, determination that actually give them the drive to achieve something that's different. Whether it's doing something that your parents didn't expect, or doing something that your parents didn't want you to do, just to actually break away from the community that you grew up in. So you could have someone that comes from a high capacity community that doesn't have the drive and doesn't have the passion and really doesn't want to strive to do anything more and feels entitled to something, versus someone that's got nothing and, to Rufus's point, has got nothing to lose. I actually think we see more success out of those attributes. So I think it becomes a personal attribute question rather than a community or socioeconomic environment. Also agree with Holly, at PwC, diversity is one of our number one priorities. And you have to address the diversity question, whether it's gender, ethnicity, intentionally. And if you don't do something different, you will never solve the issue.
Thank you. I should probably note, to close my family story, I did end up, of course, in public sector employment, just at the riskier end of it, rather than the safer end of it. Not a decision I regret in any way. To close out our panel, and I might just go from John across, we've got a great group of people who have been listening to this discussion. Many of them, well, you all look young to me, young people thinking about their futures and their careers and this question of innovation and entrepreneurship. If we could leave tonight with, from the masters up the front, one piece of advice, what would it be?
If you have a passion, follow it. Be humble and be committed to it, and don't let anyone tell you you can't achieve it. But remember where you came from and remember what you're trying to achieve, and don't think you're entitled to anything on the way.
Thank you. Jan?
Embrace learning, which is failing while simultaneously learning. Build your network and have a spirit of generosity around that. I think that there's a kind of I don't like networking. I think networking is often very one-sided, and I believe that actually there's a reciprocity that needs to be built into that part of there's a triangle that ensures your success in life. One is actually your networks and your family and the people. You're as good as the people that you surround yourself with, but part of that is your generosity of spirit in your contribution to them and in your taking from them. The other is actually your sense of purpose and passion and clarity of that. It takes sometimes some people a very short time to get their sense of purpose and their why, and other people a lifetime. That's actually okay. It's a journey. And then the third thing is the skills and capabilities. And what we've all been talking about tonight is that there is no linear path. You are going to need to build out your new basics. Your foundational skills are a set of enterprising skills that you take with you anywhere into any context, and they are being privileged. So you are at the right time, at the right place to be thinking about a portfolio of skills that are transferable. And if you get that little triangle right in your life about people about purpose and meaning and clarity of that and your why and your toolkit, you're going to be absolutely fine. And go find other people to play with.
I love that. I think probably two that come to mind from my point of view. I agree with everything that's already been said, but the notion of getting comfortable being uncomfortable, and I think that's increasingly important. You know, we're talking about young people graduating right now having 14 plus careers, increasingly casualised workforce, the opportunity that comes with that as well, but that need, you know, we've talked about risk appetite and the preparedness to take a risk on yourself and to give ideas a go. I think the more that you can get comfortable being uncomfortable, that's where growth happens, and the more that you can create supportive structures around yourself that enable you to do that, I think is really important as well. The second thing, to bridge off the idea that Jan talked about with networking, for me, it's about the kind of informal learning ecosystem you set up around yourself as well. So we've talked a lot about the formality of education tonight and the importance of that technical training and access to courses. But I think one of the most important things you can do is create a mentoring and an advisory type network around yourself where you've got the ability to learn from individuals who are in the trenches with you, who've been there and done it, you name it, and to really take that learning and use it to advance yourself. So the more that you can set up that environment around yourself, I think the better you set up your chances of success in the future that's coming as well.
Thank you. Rufus.
I think I could only add footnotes to that wonderful set of advice, but if I was adding a footnote, it would be find one of the world's problems that needs solving. It might be large or it might be small, but if you're going to do something that's going to galvanise your energies and your life and the people around you, find a problem really worth solving and have the courage to believe that you might be the one who could actually find that solution.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand back now to our CEO, Jack, for a wrap-up and some thanks to our wonderful panellists. And after that, in deference to Jan, there won't be an hour's networking session, but there will be activities involving drinking and talking and potentially exchanging business cards. Jack, over to you.
Behaviour formerly known as networking.
Yes, I'm certainly not going to talk for long. I don't want to take those inspirational sentiments out of anyone's front of mind, and particularly Julia's around drinking and eating. And so I just want to say thank you very much to everyone on the panel. I think it's a fantastic cross-section representing industry, public sector, education and people across the generations as well, and that was incredibly inspiring. And I think it's about taking these conversations which are happening more and more and taking them out into the wider world, and actually people then acting upon those and us actually seeing some results from these innovative conversations which we're being encouraged to have. So please do stick around for those networking, non-networking drinks, and continue having those conversations. And if I could just ask the panel to stay for one moment as everyone else files out. But thank you very much.